Hey guys, my name is Ben Kennedy, and you're watching another video with Hawk 12 Armory. Now, if you want to know where the term Hawk 12 Armory came from, I guess you'll have to subscribe, and maybe I'll post a video later in the future about how that came to be. Subject of today's video, you guessed it, another assignment from SDI. These guys. Today we're going over the field stripping process. We're going to be using an AR-15. For this one, but part of the field stripping process is a functions check. So we're also going to be using snap caps as well. So they call it field stripping because essentially you're supposed to be able to do it in, out in the field, I guess. Before getting started, as far as making sure you have the stuff you need, that's kind of the beauty of field stripping is you don't need much. So I'm using an AR-15, which is super similar to an M4 in the military, and they teach us to use a pen to punch out the takedown pins. Now, the materials you need to perform a field stripping kind of depends on the reason you're field stripping in the first place. If you're cleaning it after a range day, you probably just need some snap caps so you can functions check it after, and maybe a pen so you can punch out takedown pins if they're really stubborn. However, for my final project for this class, I'm going to be swapping out a trigger, and I like to have reference material just to kind of review on how to do it. You definitely need it if you're swapping out a part that you've never swapped out before. However, I like this book a lot. It's a pretty good one. This book has all kinds of good stuff in it. It's supposedly the top 18 mods for AR-15s, but yeah, you got all kinds of stuff in here. You have instructions on your bolt carrier group here. Upper receiver barrel modifications. That's a good one. I mean, with this book and the toolkit that it came with, actually the toolkit came with the book, technically. However, anyways, it really tells you how to use every tool in that toolkit. Here's step-by-step instructions on a trigger swap. That's gonna come in handy. And this toolkit's pretty awesome. I'll put a link down in the description below so y'all can check it out yourselves. So, we'll just keep that in there for now. And last thing before we get started, safety. So, ammunition, right? You don't want any live ammunition. I recommend clearing your firearm somewhere other than the space you're doing the field stripping in. Next up, safety glasses. A lot of people would debate that you don't need safety glasses for a field strip, but I wear safety glasses with just about anything I do around firearms, so good force of habit. Without further ado, I guess we can get started. Now, before working on firearms, you always clear it, make sure the firearm's safe, right? So the first thing we're gonna do is make sure it's on safe, just like that. Now we gotta remove the feed source, right here. Then we're gonna charge it, just to make sure any round that's in the chamber gets extracted and ejected. And we're also gonna lock it back. Now with the AR-15, you can't really take it apart until you send the bolt back forward, so we're going to go ahead and do that. Now we have two takedown pins that separate the upper and lower receiver. Splitting the gun in half is going to be the first thing we do. Now we're going to start disassembling the upper receiver first. Grab the charging handle, pull it back a ways, as far as back as it'll go. You'll have to remove the bolt carrier group before you can take the charging handle out. So here's your charging handle, here's your bolt carrier group, and this also gets disassembled in the field stripping process. Take your handy dandy pen, the same one you did the takedown pins with, pull this firing pin retaining pin out. Now that we're working with small parts, I'm reminded that it helps to have storage for your small parts. This is actually pretty cool. This whole thing is magnetic. Now that your firing pin retaining pin is out, your firing pin can come out. Now that your firing pin is out, your cam pin can come out. That's going to rotate and you pull it out just like that. And lastly, pull the bolt out. And now you have your bolt carrier disassembled. So now we can move on to the lower receiver. Now all that's left for field stripping is the lower receiver, and it's really just the buffer and the buffer spring. Now the buffer spring is compressed by the buffer, and the buffer is held in and retained by this notch here. And that same pen that you've been using this whole time, press that guy in, and it should come out. And you'll want to separate these two for inspection purposes. So a good trick if these are ever stuck together like this, is you want to grab the spring and grab the buffer, and you want to twist the spring to make the diameter of the spring wider, and that's going to cause it to loosen up and down here where it's grabbing the buffer. So here's all your parts. This is the AR-15 field stripped. I have all my small parts, or smaller parts, contained in this parts bin right here. Now we'll just say we cleaned it or whatever. Now we're just gonna say that we finished cleaning it. Now it's time to put it back together, right? I always start with the lower receiver first because it's only these two items here. Now we're gonna check inside the buffer tube, make sure there's no debris in there. The way I check the spring is I hold it next to my ear and I flick it a few times, and it should sound like a gun off of Star Wars. Also, what you can do is you find a flat surface and you roll it, and it shouldn't jump. It should roll smooth. If it starts wobbling when you roll it, you probably need a new buffer spring. So the buffer spring, you just feed it in, take the buffer, put it right in there, just the way you took it out. I also like to lube my buffer spring. It helps with cycling as well as the sound. I'm kind of picky about sound when I'm firing, and that's your lower receiver. Now to do the upper receiver, the first thing you're gonna do is assemble the bolt carrier group. So you have your bolt carrier here, and we're gonna get all of our small parts. Now first thing that's gotta go in is the bolt. Now when you're inspecting the bolt, you wanna inspect your gas rings. Make sure none of them are cracked, and the gaps between all three rings are relatively the same. You can check your extractor. It should be really, really hard to move. You can check your ejector. This is called the dynamic ejector, and that should also be really hard to press in. Check your lugs, make sure there's no chipping or wear on them. And then other than that, just check for cracks and stress abnormal wear. This guy's gonna go right in the front here. Now once it pops in, it should be kind of suctioned in there. It should feel almost like a suction cup. Now inside here, that cavity is tapered. So as you're putting the bolt in, these gas rings are being squeezed together, and those gaps in those gas rings are closing. That's why it's grabbing. That's what you want. Next up with the cam pin. This cam pin's only going to go in one side of the bolt. Now if you try one way and it doesn't want to go in, you just turn the bolt around and try it again. Now you're going to twist that 90 degrees, and that's going to allow cavity for the firing pin. Now the firing pin you also want to inspect. The way I do it is you find a flat surface and you try to get it to pivot around the tip, and it should go in a circle. It also shouldn't wobble. This firing pin's good to go. What we're gonna do is you just drop it in, just like so. Lastly is gonna be your firing pin retaining pin. Now you wanna look at this and make sure it still has a gap. You want it to be open. If it's stuck closed, you could try to pry it back open, but I recommend just getting a new one. This guy goes right back in the hole it came from. These are kind of tricky. I always have better luck if I'm pressing downward while I'm trying to slide it in. Now to inspect this, you want to make sure the bolt moves somewhat freely with pretty good resistance from those gas rings, and you shake it next to your ear and you want to hear that firing pin moving around. We're good to go. Now before putting it in the upper receiver, you want to look in there, make sure it's not excessively dirty, make sure there's no cracks going on, look inside the chamber, do like a quick inspection. You're just doing a preventative inspection at this point. Now to get the bolt carrier group and the charging handle back in, charging handle has to go in first. Now what I do is I always hold the upper receiver upside down, I hold charging handle, and you gotta feel for the slot that these notches go into. You just set it in there like this, and you just push down and slide back until it falls in. Push it in maybe another 1/4 inch. Now your bolt carrier group can go in. Another pro tip, make sure your bolt is out before you do this. Now, your gas key is gonna sit right inside of your charging handle. Just like that. I always check for freedom of movement before I actually put the rifle back together. So you just check this, make sure that it doesn't sound like there's any rocks or anything in there. These should be really well lubed and everything. Now we're ready to mate the upper and lower receiver back together. I always do the front takedown pin first, and then the rear takedown pin, just like that. Now, cycle it a few times to make sure it cycles okay. Now this is where the functions check comes in. Now we field stripped the firearm, we inspected the parts, and we've reassembled it. Now it's time to do a functions check, make sure we didn't mess anything up. First thing we're gonna do, make sure the firearm's on safe. Also do a double check, make sure there's no live ammunition in here for any weird reason. Now the first functions check we're gonna do is without snap caps. What we're gonna do is charge the firearm. That should have cocked it. With the firearm on safe, you're gonna try to depress the trigger and nothing should happen. So the safety's working. Now we're gonna put it on fire, press the trigger. There's the click, and while holding the trigger down, we're going to charge it again, cock it, check for a reset, there you go, and then fire it again. And I'm going to do that one more time, but before I press the trigger the second time, I'm going to put it on safe. There we go. Now we're going to do the same thing, but with snap caps. Make sure it's feeding correctly, make sure it's ejecting correctly, make sure it's extracting, all the good stuff. Firearms unsafe. Chamber good. Safety's working. Put on fire. Hit the snap cap. Good ejection. See. Reset, fire. Okay. Now we're going to eject that round again. And the follower caused the bolt to lock back, which is what we want. So after that, we're going to put the firearm back on safe. Remove the feed source, and we're going to do the clearing procedures once again. And other than that, stay strapped, stay safe, and until next time.